come on into our favorite auditorium. You can have a front row seat and make your bum as comfortable as possible. And thank you for being here. We are, I mean, this Atmananda, it goes from super logical and easy to a little bit like, what? What's he saying? And there's a few parts in these discourses that may be that. And welcome, Susan Telford. Thank you for co-hosting this week.
Hi,
Glad to.
Bill. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And we just finished the conference. We had a full weekend from Friday to Sunday with the conference. It was unbelievable. It was just awesome. And if if you're interested in any of those speakers, the replays are still available for $127. You can watch them all in your leisure. If you join the member area, you can have access to all the conferences and the speakers. And so it's that. But when you come away from a conference, it's like a in-person conference. The residue and the leakage factor, like before we press the button to go live just now, Susan and I were talking about the experiences that were found in the conference, and yours truly, Jenny Beal, was there. She hosted Venkatesh's session. Venkatesh will be joining me. We'll be doing a retreat, an intensive down in India in February of 24. And I'm going to stop in London and I'm going to go meet Jenny Beal in person and her husband, Richard. I'm looking forward to that in January of 24. But the conferences are fantastic. I was wondering if we were going to have the next conference in September because, if we don't sell enough replays, it doesn't really pay for what it costs to put them on. But I just still have a pull. I still feel that the ability to put them on will happen, and they're helpful. They're valuable for people to have awakening experiences and meet all these different teachers and traditions that we handpick. So we're going to have the September conference, and it's going to be awesome. I don't know what the title of it is or the theme, or even who's going to be who the speakers will be. But anyway, if you didn't get to go to this conference that was this weekend, get on our mailing list and be alerted to the one that will be in September. No, actually, I think we're moving it. Susan, you don't know this yet. I think we're going to move it to October next year. The one thing I want to that is going to tell us which month it is, September or October, is going to be contacting Rupert. I don't want to miss him next time, and I want to make sure I get him a weekend where he's free. So that's going to be the first thing I'm going to do this week, is nail him down. So let's go ahead and get into the discourses of this awesome Krishna Menon experience. Susan, we're going to start with 91. The title is Standard of Morality. These are behavioral kind of questions. What are your thoughts, and what did you glean from this discourse?
So, with most of these ones today, I feel to go quite slowly, kind of through the argument that he's making. He's kind of developing logic through some of them, and the beginning part is self-evident, isn't it, that standards of morality are relative. It depends on, you know, the culture that you're brought up in, and the time and the place and all of that other things. And then this sentence, it says, but man being essentially one all the world over, a common and absolute standard of morality is necessary. And at first I thought, is that true? Is that true, actually? That a common standard of morality is necessary. And he says this is rarely thought of. I thought, okay, I've not really thought of that either.
Huh.
But then he says it's only necessary for those who are on a path to absolute reality. And I like the little examples he gives. The following can be such an absolute standard of morality, and then it becomes quite simple. Vice is that particular act or thought or feeling that tends to inflate the ego. So anything that's acting on behalf of an illusory separate self could be termed to be a vice in this language. And virtue is any act, thought, or feeling that tends to attenuate the ego. I had to look up the word attenuate just to remind myself of the nuance of what it actually meant. And the definition that I saw was to reduce the effect of. So then it becomes quite simple. Anything we do on behalf of the true self is virtue, and anything that we do on behalf of the ego is vice. He says all acts, thoughts, and feelings directed towards the I principle or to its nature are virtuous. And these are loaded words for us, aren't they? Virtuous and vices. You think, oh, good, bad. But it's just a flavour, I feel. It's a direction. And he says virtue and vice have a place only in the relative sphere. And things, and in a relative way of speaking, you'd say that, well, if you're selfish, that's a vice. If you're selfless, that's a virtue. But he's translated that towards who and what we act on behalf of. And even that language doesn't really make sense, but you get the point. Is this arising on behalf of the separate self, or am I resting as my true nature? And then he says, love itself can be both selfish and selfless according to its goal. And then the kicker right at the end, when you understand from your guru who you are, when you know you're not the separate self, when you know you're not the body, mind, personality, then you transcend both virtue and vice. It all becomes one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had
So
the
at
same.
first,
I had the same feeling from that first paragraph. Same thing you said. I felt when I read it, and then when it said that such an absolute standard becomes necessary only for those who are on the path to absolute reality, I actually doubted that was accurate. I'm thinking, why that would be us that are on the path of absolute reality, and it's the at least the intention, and then the intention goes away in favor of just movement. You end up at the last sentence that you read,
yeah. And I
where
think
they both go out.
I think that's the crucial part, isn't it? On the path, it's still necessary to know what's arising on behalf of the separate self, and what is the true self. You know, what's the unchanging, and then the final sentence, when you understand. So in that sense, you're no longer on the path toward. You understand who you are, and then it becomes unnecessary.
Right. Because there's no, the others imply good or bad, that one is higher, one is lower. The others imply that there's a preference, and you're 100% right. When understanding falls in, there, everything is everything is consciousness.
Yeah.
And the guru here it can be a teacher, or it mostly at this point of reference, I think, is your Satguru. It's the inner understanding and knowing of your own being that just informs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it that you're 100% right, that to really look at it as an introspective investigation in these kinds of statements, the
Yeah.
standard of morality. Yeah, he's a great teacher. He would have been he would have been a great professor,
Yeah.
because he teaches at that level
Yeah.
as a
I think
policeman.
was he a policeman? Yeah, he was a
Yeah,
policeman.
yeah. Hard to
Susan's
believe.
writing, if both vice and virtue are transcended, what does this mean for right action in the world? And that's the difference, isn't it, between right action in the world coming from a conditioned mind. Um, I'm just laughing at what Jenny said. Thank you for the second part of my sentence, Jenny. Jenny's saying only consciousness acts. Sometimes it plays the game of ignorance and sometimes it doesn't. And what I was going to say was there's no doer. There's no doer. It's consciousness that's doing it. So yeah.
Yeah. The body mind at that point is sufficiently it sort of has stepped aside, and consciousness is just in movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The vehicle, the Mercedes Benz.
Fun. Okay, so we'll move to 92. How and why do I live?
And he says, do you live at all? So who is the you that you're referring to? Or who's the I that you're referring to when you say, how and why do I live?
Mm.
The body, mind, personality is finite, but this, what he calls the changeless I principle, is eternal. It alone lives. And again, it's almost the same as in the one before. It's what is your identification? What is, and even identification isn't the right word, but what do you know? What is known? What is living this? It's not to the I that presumably asked that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, don't give it too much energy. If this is not crystal clear, super clear, just allow the open mind to be itself. Just allow that allow yourself to just be open to not knowing. Jenny Beal is one of her favorite titles is live in not knowing. That's it, right?
Yeah, living and
Live
not
in
knowing is
live in
in
not
the
knowing.
podcast.
And if we come to these gatherings, these book studies with an open mind of not knowing, then we're able to receive and experience what's being offered, I think.
For me, I just took this as a self-inquiry question. Who is the I who's
Yeah.
asking that question?
Yeah. That's what I came back from that intensive in Canada. Tell me who you are.
Yes.
And I'm still having that almost as a morning mantra. Tell me who you are. online? When I ask that question, it becomes a self-inquiry.
And with the with the intention of not to try to find the answer with the mind. That's where the living and not knowing comes. It's like dropping a stone into a pond. Who am I? Without actually trying to grasp onto an answer, just to let the ripples.
That's a good visual, Susan. I love that.
Caitlin saying
Caitlin,
not knowing is my
yeah,
superpower.
Caitlin, that's awesome. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to continue the second paragraph, it gets better. The how and the why of life are sought in manifestations outside or objects. When you turn to the manifestation, you lose sight of your center and cease to live really. So, the best way for the best living is to cling onto the living alone, or you could say to cling to just being present in this now experience, forgetting the how and the why of it completely. That's the best living. That's what Krishna Menon says. And I totally agree with this.
Yeah, and that whole paragraph is summed up in those two words that Jenny posted: consciousness acts.
Yes. Only consciousness acts. Right. Yeah. That's why once you get past once you, as it said in the first discourse, you transcend both virtue and vice, you, you're you're living in understanding that there is only consciousness, and you are that, and it doesn't have a bodysuit. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at 93.
Um, yeah, let's. um, I felt as though any understanding I had of 93 came from 94. So I'm interested in what you thought and what others think, Bill, because um, all I really got from this was that, in the first sentence, one perception is really the resultant of ever so many distinct and separate perceptions, but we see only one at a time. Kind of reminded me of a bit of what Michael Singer was saying in our other book group in Living Untethered. But yeah, I felt I really feel to go to on to 94 unless you've got something else to say, because I feel that builds up the how perception is formed, how what's actually happening. I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone else wants to say
Uh,
something about 93, but I
I,
don't have an awful lot to say about that one, I have to say.
I have a lot to say about it
Oh, good, good.
because this actually caused me to realize that I had this huge awakening experience that this last sentence points to. It was in 2011, and I was with Muji. I was living at the ashram in Portugal, and I was sitting on a bale of hay, looking at a long table where we would feed 50 people at one of our meals. And Muji was up on a hill with about 8 people planting plants and things. And when I was sitting on that bale of hay, I was looking at a plate on the table, and all of a sudden I had this total connection with this ceramic bowl or plate. And I realized that that plate was looking at itself through these eyes. and I was like startled by the experience. And I looked up at the clock, and the same thing. The clock was the whatever the clock is was looking at itself through these eyes. I felt like I was the clock, I was the plate, and then the table. The table was looking at itself through these eyes. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Muji. And I got up and I ran up the hill to tell Muji what was happening. And there was a rock, a bigger than my fist. There was a rock down at his feet. I picked up the rock and I said, Muji, this rock is seeing itself through these eyes. And Muji had this great big smile on his face, and he just gave me a hug, and he said, "You are being given a gift, brother." And then sent me on my way, and it was just a joyful experience. But if you look at that last sentence, even the point itself, when examined, is reduced to a geometrical point, a mere idea. So, looked at in the right perspective, an object and its perception are non-existence. It's always me looking at me. It's always me looking at me, but it's not Bill. It's consciousness. And so that was my big. That was a big wow for me when I read this morning, because it took me right back to, oh my God, that's that experience that I had in 2011. Mm-hmm. So let's go into 94 and see what unpacked for you.
So he's kind of leading us through objects are nothing but form, sound, taste, touch, or smell. So again, I was kind of using it as an inquiry. Is that the case? As I was going through it, objects are nothing but form, sound, touch, taste, or smell. And I thought, that's true. That's true. I can verify that in my own experience. And it's evident that any one of these can never be separated from its respective sense organ, even in thought. So if I see something, you can't separate the seeing and the sight. It can't be separated. I thought, okay. Similarly, seeing, hearing, etc. can never shine independently of consciousness. And I thought, what does that mean? And then I was looking at something and I thought, they're seeing, but it can't be separate from consciousness, because if it was separate from consciousness, I wouldn't know I was seeing. There would be no awareness, would there? So by the same logic, they are consciousness itself. Thus, objects are only consciousness, and that is the I principle. Now, I was just taking it really, really, really slow, like not just, kind of swallowing the words, but actually experimenting. And then he says, one directs attention to something, but is it that something we perceive by the senses? No. We perceive only the superimposition of the senses upon that something. And that reminded me of Bernardo Kastrup and his dashboard. That what we're actually seeing is not what's out there. And what is out there? What is that something? I mean, Francis Lucille says, we know that there is something rather than nothing. But what is that something? Because the senses superimpose something on top. This vague something remains as the substratum of form, sound, etc. It's what it's made of, but it always remains unknown to the senses or the mind. And I thought that is true. That's true. Because we can't know what's out there, what's not the dashboard, what's the reality. By what we can't know it via the senses or the mind.
Right.
But his next thing is, it's that unknown something that we want to know. Without any superimposition, but no agent like the senses or the generic mind can be utilized, because all they do is keep on superimposing. The mind always functions conjointly with the sense organs. In the absence of these agents, neither forms nor thoughts appear. And I thought, what does that mean? Without senses or the mind, neither forms nor thoughts appear. And that seems to be true, doesn't it?
Mm.
Do we know that? Do we know that's true? We only know that things do appear with the senses and the mind superimposing onto this something.
Well, there's an assumption that there's the interpretation is given through the faculty of the mind that thinks it's a person, or the interface that thinks it's it's a something. And there's an assumption that there's energy there, or that there's movement, but we can't know what it is, not with the dimensional interface interpretation that is being used to determine a something. Eve says the senses and perceptions are the filters through which we may experience the appearance of reality. Yeah. Well, we're using five senses. When I interviewed Donald Hoffman for this documentary, he said, we're using five senses, or we're using three-dimensional or four-dimensional filters. Well, why not 12-dimensional filters? Why not 20-dimensional filters? This interface, it's a body suit that with the five senses, it's using the faculties of what this has. It doesn't mean other faculties are not available, or are not. Yeah.
Yeah. Don says, doesn't he, that this apparatus is quite primitive, really.
Yeah, he does. So when we see those cone heads that might be aliens, they may be from a different dimensional reality that are sharing the same space with us. That's another whole subject. Funny. Cone heads. Remember those cone heads from Saturday Night Live? Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
You don't? Okay.
Live in a
Dennis
different culture.
No, yeah, no, Dennis.
We don't have Saturday Night Live.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay.
No,
all right.
I don't think so, anyway.
That's funny. Okay. So
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
You want to move to 95? Several ways of consoling people in misery. Does anyone else have anything they want to share before we move to 95? Oh, Susan Wright says, yes, this is also Donald Hoffman's idea that we have this headset which limits everything we perceive. Well, it's not. Yeah, it's what his theory. He gives language and description to something that's science, and it's also it's mathematical. It's a theory that's based on math.
Yeah. I think maybe it's just worth just highlighting the last paragraph of 94. There's a fundamental difference between the functionings of the agents and of consciousness. When the senses and mind function, they have separate objects and they superimpose these objects upon that something. In the case of consciousness, strictly viewed, consciousness has no object of its own. Therefore, when anything is viewed from the standpoint of consciousness, superimposition is impossible. And I'd like to hear something more about that, because I kind of see that, but not quite. So if anybody has anything more to say on that, superimposition is impossible.
But isn't that primordial awareness the thing that makes all objects of experience, even the subject and the object, dissolve into one presence? Isn't that just describing primordial, pure awareness?
Yeah.
Jenny Beal, what do you
Yeah,
have to say
I
about that?
know. We need you, Jenny. There's just little bits that I feel like I'm not quite grasping the fullness of that. I want to.
Hmm. Well, I think you are, Susan. I know that you get that, because I have many conversations with you that point to this.
Yeah.
But Jenny, okay, so she says superimposition is a function of mind. It's not reality. The standpoint of consciousness is the one reality. Yeah, that's where I feel
I
like
think that's what you said, Bill, really in different words. Yeah.
that was my experience with the rock and the clock and the plate and the table. All of that was, it was almost like all the veils, all the impositions that overlaid anything were dissolved, and somehow consciousness was able or the conscious, the I was able to see it. Bill, the body mind, was able to see without the anything being imposed upon it, because I felt like I was that was being seen.
Yeah.
It was weird. It was weird. Yeah, but I never forgot it. It was happened. It's like it just happened just now. It's like it's one of those things you can't unsee or unexperience.
Yeah.
So moving to 95, several ways of consoling people in misery. I thought this was pretty cool.
Yeah. To me, it just pointed at speaking and knowing where other people are, and not, using skillful means, I suppose. Um, I thought of a person, coming to a teacher saying, I'm really upset. I feel really, really miserable. Some tragedy has happened in my life or whatever. And the teacher saying, examine what misery is and rise above it, and how unhelpful that would be at a certain stage. It would be absolutely one pointed wisdom to one who was ready to hear that, but it would almost be cruel to one who was not. So to me, it pointed to that. The kind of the background to me was pointed to that.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, going to that point, I mean, I've been in Francis sessions and I've been in Rupert sessions, and I've heard both of them answer differently to different, what I would think of as the same kind of a question, they would answer differently based on the way it was presented, and they both have a way of pausing in and waiting for the answer to be unique precisely for this question or this situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think, I think you're 100% right. You can't just take oh, well, just rise above it. Get over it, man. You're not a body.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So go to 96.
Yeah.
Yeah.
90. Yeah. Let's look at 96. I think there is in that last paragraph on 95, he says his faculty of reason should be aroused. He should be made to feel that his misery is beyond the control of human effort, and that no amount of grief will mend matters. Indeed, it can only make him more miserable. So he's really he's inviting this questioner to contemplate or have his own or her own investigation. And this is someone. This isn't a real question. This isn't a person. This is someone else. This isn't someone that's actually having the experience. This is just a what if. Several ways of consoling people. This isn't a real question. I don't think. What about this, Master? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So 96. Let's look at that.
So in every question, you forget your real self. Every question arises only in the relative sphere and is concerned only with the manifestation. When you turn to manifestation, you forget or get away from the I principle. So the correct method of solving every question is to turn to the center and then look back at the question. And this is kind of the advice running through all of these, I feel, is turn back to who you are and now look from that perspective. Because anything else is just going round in circles. It's keeping on the hamster wheel. And he says, then the question will stand revealed as absurd. You know, how do I improve myself? Well, remember who you are. And that question just becomes absurd, doesn't it? Who is there to improve?
Well, even more relevant questions, and I find this to be a new experience in the awakening consciousness, what I call awakening awareness. If you have difficult questions with your own life, your kids, your partner, your spouse, when you do what this just said, and you turn to the center and allow the question to come into that place without having a predetermined reference, but just allow it to be offered, the right answer emerges out of that, and it's more of an informing that occurs, and he gives the formula for getting for being informed. Turn to the center, go to awareness, and just rest as awareness without any mental efforting.
Yeah, it really reminded me of the teachings of the Tao Te Ching. the concern with what the Tao calls the 10,000 things is the distraction, and the advice is to come back to the center, come back to the still point. The Taoist master lives in the center.
Yeah.
And then the perspective is different. And right action, wisdom will come forward from that position of being in the center, of
Right.
being established in your true nature.
And it's actually not right action that's an activity of the mind per se. It's right action that emerges
Yeah,
from the quiet center.
yeah.
Yeah.
Jenny said about the last one, the 94, about consoling people. You start from where the person is. You feel the misery yourself, but are not attached to it. From that compassion and non-identification, being with the person, often in loving silence, may be the best you can do. And that refers to this one too, because that's such a great description of being in the center, of, as he says, turning back to the center with
Yeah.
non-attachment and love.
There's so much wisdom, and your life lived different in this teaching. And it's that last sentence, just what you said. It may also be said that every question brings its own answer with it.
Yeah. Catherine just said the symbol of the cross also takes you to the center, falling into the divine heart behind the human heart.
Well, you would have to have that interpretation. When I see the cross, I see religion. So that would have to be, and that may be my takeaway from years of being religious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I see what you're saying,
that
Catherine.
image. I like that image though that Catherine is offering. You know, that the intersection of the human and the divine, that sweet spot.
Yes, yes,
That
yes. Yeah.
another.
I like that interpretation also.
I liked 97. How can I be worthy of my guru? Immediately came the answer, only by your death, meaning the death of the ego.
So there's no you to be worthy, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is where you have to die to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is worthy? You know, what do I deserve? Is that what that means?
Well, I read it as a person asking, what can I do to um to make my guru happy, to be a good disciple of my guru. and the guru says, just die. That part that's asking that question, that part that has that energy of wanting to please, wanting to be good, just chop that one's head off. Because that's separation, isn't it? And it says that as long as there is that sense of separation of guru and disciple, one's worthiness is not complete. Because the realization is there's only one, isn't there? The guru and the disciple. There's not a hierarchy of the guru's better than me, you know.
Yeah, for most gurus. I mean, for some gurus.
Yeah.
Some gurus need to stay in the prominent chair.
He says either by the annihilation of the ego completely or by the disciple merging in the guru and becoming inseparably one forever. that is when he is established in his natural state.
Yeah. And the guru in this term would be the symbol of oneself. Shelley had a question. What happens, Jenny, when the person really wants you to speak? They feel ignored and angry if you don't speak, but you seem to cause things to get worse when you do, when we know silence is best. Here's the answer, Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
If the person needs words, words will come. You allow them to come from the silence and truth, not thinking what to say, not condoning ignorance. There it is.
And there's that real trust, isn't there? Or openness to allow that to be there, to allow that to happen without the mind getting in and saying it should be this way or that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, Krishna Menon sort of implied that people pleasing isn't helpful. And speaking when silence is called for is people pleasing. And it's the old pattern of, well, I need to say something. The quiet is killing me. Well, just let it kill you. Stay in the silence, say nothing. Or what Jenny suggests is totally accurate. If something is to be said, it will come of its own.
Yeah.
And you can't stop it even. You're compelled to say what compassion or love wants to say to itself. And Shelley said, hard to do when they're so excitable and yelling and angry.
Yeah. That's where the trust comes, isn't it? That something that happens where you stop second guessing yourself and just allow it to well, not even allow. Every word I say now, I just think that's not right. That's not right. Who's allowing anything?
Well, I mean, it goes both ways. Sometimes you say nothing, and it's more powerful than saying a word. You just sit, and this is where silence is so amazing. Sometimes when you just say nothing and you just allow silence to be what it is, it speaks much louder than words. Even when someone's angry, it's what is it that's angry? What is it that's looking for attention? What is it that's expressing in this frequency? When it's given silence, it it comes to a dissolution. It dissolves that energy of interpretation, of the energy of expression that's based on a belief, that's based on some identification, some trauma, something, and it dissolves itself in silence. So you find that, and sometimes you say something that you're not comfortable saying. it comes out of your mouth and you go, oh, did I just say that? Right? It works both ways. Yeah. Silence, Eve says, silence is a holding space to allow the energy to flow on its own. Yes, unimpeded and often dissolved, often just.
And what feels important is that we cannot know ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if you're on this path, this teaching, and it's regarding someone, a friend that is not, that is suffering. Man, I don't let Bill the bodysuit go into that situation being Bill the bodysuit, because he'll say something that he can't unsay. So I really, this is why the teaching of Francis and Rupert and many of the teachers that are you really admire and respect, Jenny, and many of you, when you are in that transmission moment, there's a pause there. There's not that reactionary. Oh, I know. Yeah, I got this. I know what to say. No, there's a pause where you're connecting. You're doing just what Krishna Menon says. You're going to that center place, and you're being informed from divine wisdom, the wisdom that is operating the whole thing, and you're connecting with that, and it's being expressed.
Yeah. Victoria just posted, trust the Spirit to give the words that are appropriate, quoting from Matthew and Mark in the Bible.
There it is. That's true, right there. Thank you, Victoria. It's good to see you. Nice to meet you at the conference this weekend. Okay, we want to move on?
Yeah. Love and sacrifice. So this kind of continues from the one before. You love your guru for your true death. That's the point, isn't it? Ultimately,
Yeah.
that's why we're here. That's why we're on this path.
To die.
We may begin the path with all kinds of reasons. I want
Yeah.
to be happier. I want a better life. I want the suffering to stop. Whatever. But then the very one who wants that, who starts the path, cannot complete the path because that's the one that has to die.
Yeah.
And that can be hard. That can be hard to accept. And he says, but even ordinary mundane love involves a certain amount of sacrifice of the lower self or the ego. When love becomes more and more sublime, the degree of sacrifice involved also increases proportionately. Ultimately, when you want to love the truth, guru or the self, the absolute, when that's all you want, the sacrifice required is also not partial. It demands the whole of the lower self or the death of the ego itself. It's such a paradox, that, isn't it? That what begins, what wants that, what starts that, can't continue it, can't get to the end.
It is a paradox, yes. And at the same time, like that last when the sacrifice required is also not partial. It demands the whole of the lower self or the death of the ego itself. It's when it's experienced, it's nothing. When the experience comes in, the value of uh, of the experience overwhelms the desire that began the search. It just overwhelms it. It becomes such an overwhelming presence that there's nothing there to be sacrificed anymore.
Yeah.
It's
Because
no
it's,
sacrifice.
yeah, because it's seen to not be true.
Well, the one that had the belief is gone.
Yeah. 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 It says, doesn't it? Thus, in all cases of pure love, there is no trace of the lower self to be found. That's exactly what you're saying. It's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
The
love
one
is
who
said to
starts
be,
the what?
I was just going to read the next part. That
Oh,
love is
yeah, the
said to
one who
be
starts
only
the
given.
search is gone. That
Yeah.
the body mind that, like, I was curious. I thought I could have a better life with Christianity. I thought if I knew the teaching of Jesus, I would go see him, find out where he hung out in Israel, and I would understand that teaching, I would have a better life. And that was just a beginning, but it was curiosity for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Go on.
So then he goes on to say, love of objects is really love of the happiness supposed to be derived from objects. Happiness is your real nature. And that was the subject of our whole last book group, wasn't it? Rupert's book.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, you are the happiness you seek.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah. Therefore, you are loving your real nature. You cannot split yourself into the subject loving and the object loved. And that kind of relates back to what he was saying before about objects and the seeing and hearing. So it is yourself or happiness that is loved. Therefore, love and self are one. It's the ultimate. But to reach it, you must begin to cultivate that love even here by sacrificing the interests of the lower self little by little. Because the love of objects is limited, the sacrifice of the ego involved is only partial, but the love of truth is unlimited and the sacrifice involved is also complete. And he's really clear, isn't he? He's so clear about this. He's saying, what is required here for awakening is the death of the ego. You can't keep a little bit of it that I kind of quite like.
And the cool thing is that once the light comes on just a little bit, and you recognize and you realize, once the awakening awareness comes into understanding a little bit, it does all the work. I mean, it's not even work. The fact that it comes on, and you use these just a few tools to initiate the moving to the center of your attention. It just moves into play, and it's you doing you. It's your essential nature realizing itself, and it comes online, so to speak.
Yeah. And there's a surrender to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's removing the attention from the object of experience to to realize that you are that which you were seeking. Yeah. There's a couple of comments. Victoria says, regarding seeing, the eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love. Meister Eckhart. Yes. Also regarding Bill's experience with the table, ceramic plate, etc. Yeah, same. And Shelley, after the conference, the little ego bugger is active again, more stuff bubbling up. Awesome. What is it that sees that? That doesn't have a labeler. Catherine says, sacrifice, as Jesus showed us on the cross, the vertical is our God self. The horizontal is the human conditioning, is our human conditioning. And Barbara, in the conference, it was revealed through the story of the uninvited wedding guest. It looks like a question, Barbara.
Which speaker was that?
Yeah. Do you want to come on and say something? We have time.
Don't know where.
You want to move to 99, Shiva?
Yeah.
Must go to another meeting. Bye, Victoria. Thanks for joining us. Why is Shiva called the destroyer?
So he says Shiva is absolute love, or the I principle in man. Directing one's attention to him wholeheartedly brings about the total annihilation of both the ego and the world of its creation. This is a necessary I can't say that word.
Corollary?
When Shiva is visualized as the ultimate. And this is kind of the point, isn't it? That this aspect of establishing one in the ultimate, and therefore the annihilation of the ego, is attributed to an external god, Shiva, and thus he has come to be called the destroyer. It's just a symbol, isn't it? It's a symbol for the principle of annihilation that happens in awakening when it's seen to. When the ego is seen to be false.
Yeah. Well, the Shiva part, it's interesting that Ramana Maharshi identifies Aranashala as Shiva. And he says, just holding Aranashala in your mind, in the mind, he says, is the destroyer of the ego. I don't know how that works. When I think of an object, okay, that's the destroyer. Just looking at a shape of a mountain destroys the personal self identity. I don't know. When I look at Aranashala, I just have this total like, whoa, wow. It's just like this total presence. So somehow it brings me into a state of awe. And I'm not a worshiping object kind of a guy. Something happens.
Yeah. Shelley saying who, Bill? Bill speaking about Aranachala, which is the hill. It's a hill rather than a mountain, isn't it? I remember you said it wasn't as big as you expected it to be.
Yeah.
It's a hill beside the ashram that Ramana Maharshi lived in all of his life. That's where he went, wasn't it?
It's
That's
not
where he
just a
went.
hill. It's big enough. It's kind of between a hill and a mountain because it's big enough to have caves and that you can live in, and its circumference is, it's like 5 miles around, so it's 14 kilometers. Yeah. But this is the one trouble that I have with the description that Ramana gives it. He's sort of giving an object this power of Shiva, and you really have to go into the place of symbols, of allowing symbols to be that that thing that gives you the experience. But when you do the walk of Aranashala called Girivalam, it has an effect on you. It brings you into a sense or an experience of abiding presence that is palpable. He saw something there when he was 16 that made him leave home and live the rest
That's
of
where
his
he
life
wanted to
there.
go, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's more to see. I'd quite like to ask Jenny that. Is there more to see in that 99, Jenny, about Shiva? What's his reason for that just kind of randomly being in there?
Okay, moving on. What do you see? 100.
So I'm presuming that was a question to Atmananda from one of his disciples. Well, what do you see from the perspective of we sometimes think that if somebody's enlightened, they must see something different. Especially people who have been students of A Course in Miracles, that you see the real world. You think, well, do they see a different world? When they actually look out their physical eyes, are they seeing something different? And he says, I see the seeing or form, which is only a synonym for seeing. Likewise, sound is only a synonym for hearing. I hear the hearing or sound. But these seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling can never become the objects of seeing, hearing, etc. Therefore, you do not see anything, you do not hear anything, you do not touch anything, you do not taste anything, you do not smell anything. It's the perception is one. The hearing and the sound, it's just one thing.
Yeah. And this is the next sentence. Form can never exist independently of seeing. And you can never have an experience that awareness isn't there.
Yeah. Yeah, he says form can never exist independently of seeing. Form is seeing itself and never outside it. This means not only not outside the body, but also not outside the seeing or not separate from seeing. When understood as such, perception ceases to have any meaning whatsoever. And that reminded me of that workbook lesson. We give everything all the meaning it has. When we think ourselves to be the separate perceiver, putting meaning onto things.
Yeah. Then we're just projecting our identity into the experience as the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then he talks about, so he dismisses both the realist philosophy and the idealist philosophy. So he's saying the realist philosophy is built upon the reality of gross objects, and the idealist philosophy is built upon the reality of mind. So the belief that things are material, separate material objects, or the belief that everything is just mental. He says they both crumble before this argument. So there is only perception without its corresponding object. But a perception, thought, or feeling without the taint of any object is pure knowledge or the reality itself. Therefore, even when you see an object, you really see only yourself. Now, I have to say I was lost there. I'm not following that argument there. That there is only perception without its corresponding object. And then
That was
even
my
when you see
experience,
an
though.
object,
Hmm? That was
it's
my experience with the rock and the table and the plate. Everything disappeared in favor of consciousness seeing itself.
yeah. Yeah. So yes, that last sentence, I see that even when you see an object, even when you see the rock or the plate or the table, you're only seeing yourself. You're seeing consciousness only. Um, but what does it mean when it says, but a perception, thought, or feeling without the taint of any object?
That's just the seeing occurring. It has to remove the objects, the descriptions, the labels. It's only seeing.
It's without the division into objects, Jenny's saying. Yeah, one totality.
Yeah, just consciousness. There's only consciousness. That's
Yeah,
why everything is consciousness. And all movement and what you may call good or bad, they're both one and the same.
yeah.
And nothing and everything.
This is where I run into difficulty when I try to intellectually understand it. I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. And I think, yeah, but what does that bit mean? But what does this bit mean? Whereas everything you said there, yeah, yeah,
And Dave Adams, when subject collapses, so does object. Yeah, the two become the subject and the object become one. Krishnamurti, this is his teaching that when those two become one, their oneness is. When the witness and the subject and the object become one. And let's go back to what Jenny said about Shiva. She said Shiva is normally seen as being the absolute. So it could seem confusing to call it the destroyer. Thank you. Yeah, I think the same thing,
yeah.
which is in some of the Hindu teaching, as we often think of destruction as being negative. Yeah. Yeah, I like this guy. This guy is like I like this guy, Ganesha.
Mm.
He's like the super destroyer. Yeah.
The destroyer of obstacles he is, isn't
Yes.
he?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Jenny said the mind can work only in duality, so you can't wrap your mind around it. And I'm
Yeah,
just going to add, Susan, you can't wrap your
yeah,
mind
I know.
around
No. Do you
it.
see how Susan likes to try that though?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an old conditioning, you know. If you, oh, you've got to co-host this, you have to understand it all. You know, you really have to. Ah.
So the very last thing, we have 1 minute left.
Yeah, well, I loved this last part because this to me brought it home because I get this is what I understand. Um, when he says abstract thinking is impossible without bringing in some concrete object or other in order to support it, but it has two exceptions, i.e., when you take the thoughts, I am pure consciousness or I exist. Because that's what it comes back to with all this trying to understand, trying to wrap my mind around something that can never be understood. What is it I know? What is it that I know? And all I actually know is I exist. I am. And he says, if you try to concentrate upon either of these two, you will find before long that your thought self expires, leaving you at your real center in consciousness pure. So after all of those 90 minutes of discussion, to me, that's the bullseye.
Yeah, that's the bullseye.
Yeah. When you drop everything else, what do we know? I exist.
Yeah.
And that takes you to the direct experience.
So, Lindy, if I were blind, how to understand the seeing described in this teaching? Seeing is knowing. Seeing is just knowing, or it's not seeing with the physical eyes. It's seeing as understanding, as an experience. That's the best we can do for today. Thank you all for being here.
Bill, I just want to read you Lindsay's comment just before you go, because you'll like this. Bill, I'm tuning in from the Quad Cities for a dog show, the home of John Deere tractors, I'm told.
Oh, nice.
Bill loves
Cool.
John Deere tractors.
I love John Deere tractors. Yes, I do. Yeah, they're awesome. All right. Thank you all for being with us today. This has been awesome. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
You're wonderful. And if anyone is looking to co-host, and maybe it's your first co-host, I'm looking for a co-host on May 10th. Next week is, let's see, next week is Amy Habel. So looking forward to spending next week with you and Amy Habel.